Welcome to an all-new episode of Hearthstone Discussions. Today's topic, I wanted to talk about Priest and why it is so powerful and what may need to happen in order to curb its power level a little bit. Because even though Priest may not be that high on the HS replay stats, I believe that in the highest caliber of Hearthstone, Priest is actually one of the best classes when played correctly. And one of the reasons I decided to make this video is because I did some open cups earlier today, and I actually went for a target Priest lineup. So I do believe Priest has some weaknesses, but unfortunately, its strengths really do overshadow anything that could be wrong with the class. But for today's video, I just wanted to go over some of the problems in Priest that maybe could be curbed in some future expansions. But let's just dive into it and see what exactly I might propose in order to curb Priest just a little bit. The first thing that I wanted to talk about is something that a lot of people are complaining about, and that is the Discover mechanic in Priest. And the issue is there are just way too many good cards. And so in order to kind of give you guys an idea of how many good and bad cards there are, let's go ahead and see some of the cards that are available in Priest right now in Standard. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the spells so you guys can see exactly what I'm talking about, because the one thing I want you guys to pay attention to is how many useless cards are there to find out of Discover. So Desperate Prayer works really good with a lot of healing. Obviously, Zarella is the first thing that comes to mind. Raise Dead, really good card. Draconic Studies literally gets played in the deck. Flash Heal, good healing card. Really can't get into a problem there. Focused Will, another really decent card. Holy Smite, good for, like, all these cards are really good with Sethic so far. Renew, also really good. Wave of Apathy, also really good. Condemn, also really good. Insight, kind of has a little bit of a downside, but compared to all the other Priest cards, it's maybe the worst, but it's still a really good card. Let's see, Powered Feast, another card that works with Sethic. Shadow Word Death, also really good. Shadow Form, probably one of the worst cards in this list, not gonna lie. But they're still thriving in the shadows. Apotheosis, we all know how good that card is. Devouring Plague is also really, really decent. Like, you're starting to see where exactly this trend is going, right? So just for the sake of the example, let's just keep going through the spells. Gift of Luminance, not really the greatest, but really works with Sethic very, very well. Palm Reading, ridiculously OP. Okay, I can't say this word, sorry. It's too late at night for me right now. But this card, pretty decent. Holy Nova, pretty good for AoE if you need it, but not really the greatest card. Still a really good option, though. Hysteria, premium removal. Powered Infusion, probably another really bad card. So what, that's like three bad cards that have been identified. Rally can also be bad, but also has a lot of situations to where it could be good because you can bring back Sethic and your Poisonous Scorpion. Shadow Word Ruin, really, really good spell. Against All Odds, another really good spell. Psychic Split. I actually got lethal in this one. I actually got lethal with this card in an open cup today. So really, really decent card. Can actually enable some really wacky games in Priest. Not exactly the best card, so I'm going to go ahead and put it as the fourth bad card. Initiation. I ended up winning an open cup with this card again today. It was in Mage, but with Priest, it can also be good because of Palm Reading, but probably the fifth bad card on here. Soul Mirror, another really good card. Yaidu of Ashiraj, a card that's very, very situational, but if you get like Samoro or something, it works really, really well. So that may be, the sixth bad card that still has a really good application. And then the last card is Power Word Fortitude, which, it is often a 0-mana card. So out of all of those cards that we just looked at, Priest has maybe, 6 cards that are unplayable, and I think half of them had literally a situation that can be pretty decent. So that is the main problem with Priest, is that literally their random generation is so good in almost every single direction. How are you not going to be able to find an AoE, a stall tool, or in some cases find some card draw? Or just in another case, you can just literally go for a buff until you just run out of mana because Sethic is really, really good. And we saw how many cards can literally hit things. Like, literally all of the 1-mana cards almost target something. So that's absolutely massive whenever you're just trying to find an option. Priest has so many ways of being able to just dig into the ether, and it's just absolutely ridiculous how easily they can find some of these answers. Like, I don't know, man. I feel like that's the biggest thing that a lot of people are not thinking about, is that they are aware there's a lot of really good spell cards, but we just counted how many bad ones there are. There were 6 kind of bad ones out of, I will put how many there are actually on the screen because I didn't count that. But regardless, that's not a lot of really, really bad options. So what needs to happen in the future is that we need some bad Priest spells. Like, Priest really needs some really, really bad options so that way, like, okay, not really bad options, but they need cards that don't synergize with literally everything. The issue with these healing cards is that you could argue, yeah, like, cards like Flash Heal aren't really that decent, but cards like Zorilla exist, so that automatically makes this into almost a 5 damage AoE, and there's just a lot of instances where healing your minions is really useful, so I wouldn't even say that cards like Flash Heal are even bad. They're pretty decent, especially with cards like Sethic. Like, and that's the biggest takeaway here. Sethic is really, really OP, and Priest just doesn't find a bad option half the time. So its random generation needs to be curbed with some bad cards that disynergize, maybe some more Shadow Priest cards that enable some kind of like damage or whatever. I would actually like to see something along the lines of like Akanai Soul Priest, but that might come in the future. But regardless, Priest needs to be curbed in its random generation one way or another. But what else makes Priest really, really problematic? I think Apotheosis. The biggest issue with this card is that Priest has so many ways of just being able to stick a large HP minion that Apotheosis just might be a little bit overkill. I'm more so worried about this card in the future because it's just going to see play in every single Priest deck. And unfortunately, for all the other classes, dealing with literally any minion that can just have lifesteal when they already have large amounts of HP, because that's what Priest is known for, is just not going to make this problem any easier. Priest does need some kind of comeback ability, but it just feels like every single one of their cards can almost fill that role one way or another. You can't really leave up a minion without Priest taking, like, just absolutely dominating with that damage immediately, because that's just how important and how impactful lifesteal can be as a card. So I think I covered this in one of my previous videos about Priest, but one of the things I would like to see out of Apotheosis, if it does get nerfed in the future, is not to change its mana cost or anything like that because of cards like Palm Reading, but the best suggestion that I've seen so far is just to make Apotheosis give lifesteal until the end of the turn. So just for one turn, you get that lifesteal value. And I think that works out very, very well because unfortunately, like for Priest, you can kind of like argue the power of Apotheosis similar to Lightforged Blessing and Paladin, because Paladin has lots of ways of being able to stick large minions, and this card sometimes saw play, but the biggest issue with that card is that Paladin didn't have large HP minions. They just had, like, sometimes they'd have like 4/4s or 5/5s or something like that, or they'd have like a field of 1/1s that you would buff one way or another. But Priest is literally known for having like 3/6s, 4/9s, like, I'm sorry, not 4/9. Yeah, 4/9s. The Dragon with Taunt being one of them, and Mage Scry being another. Like, there's just so many really, really thick minions in Priest that I feel like Apotheosis is going to keep being a problematic card. But it also still keeps the Samoro Apotheosis clear for one large healing turn, because I don't think that that combo is necessarily toxic. But if it happens more than once a game, it kind of gets a little bit out of control. But again, Apotheosis is just one of those cards that I really feel like is tilting players in the wrong direction, and unfortunately for Priest, it just seems like almost any minion can be a get out of jail free card, and we kind of saw that with Quest Rogue, with like just being able to bounce anything. Like, I just don't think that this is a mechanic that Priest really needs if it's going to be going towards a different direction in the future. The last problem with Priest that I would like to address is that, unfortunately for the class, there's just no other archetype that's available to be played unless you want to play some kind of weird Discover deck or Control Priest. The only two viable decks that have been possible in the Forged in the Barrens expansion for Priest and Standard have been limited to Control Priest and APM Miracle Generation Priest that's just all about Sethic and Nazmani combos. And that deck really has only been perfected by like a couple of people that feel very, very strong with that deck. So unfortunately, Priest has had pretty much only one playable archetype throughout this entire expansion because all the other Priest decks are just not that good. Now, I will give credit where credit is due because these control decks can be teched very, very differently. Like, case in point, I've got Yogg-Saron in my deck just so that way if I'm losing or getting scammed by some Priest, I can maybe scam one way or another. But there's so many different ways of being able to build the Priest deck right now that it does kind of get points for terms of diversity. But other than one actual archetype being played, it just doesn't really feel like there's a lot going for the class right now. I would love to see some kind of like mid-range Death Rattle Priest do somewhat well in Standard, and maybe even like an aggro version of the deck that can sometimes kill me on turn 6 instead of just completely out healing and just Priest needs something else to be played. Like, I just really don't know what else I can really suggest right now, aside from giving Priest another archetype that can maybe desynergize with Control, so that way we can keep up with the problem I was talking about earlier with the random generation being all over the place and being so good, while also enabling another archetype that can maybe see some play. It's going to be kind of difficult to do this all in one expansion, but if we've seen one thing in Hearthstone, literally, Warlock was on the cusp of dying. Was on the cusp of dying during the Kobolds and Catacombs meta right before it. And then once that meta dropped with Kobolds and Catacombs, Warlock was given everything it could possibly ask for. So I wouldn't put Blizzard behind itself in order to not be able to, hit the punch here. But it's just whether or not they want Priest to go in this direction. And I just want to see something else. I want a mid-range or aggro Priest that can be somewhat achievable or somewhat playable, but with the Crab Rider nerf, the best deck that I could come up with aggro Priest was to just play that and buff buff cards, but I don't know, man. What would you guys like to see from Priest? What do you want to see less of, and what do you want to see more of from the class? Because I mean, I will admit I've had some fun with Control Priest this expansion, but it's getting a little bit worn out now that I've played a couple of games and I feel like I've got somewhat of a grasp with it. It's just I want to see something else fresh. Maybe we can get like another card like Grave Runes that can enable some kind of like weird board-centric priests that aren't just about just cheating large amounts of minions. Like I'm not sure, man. Like I am kind of uncertain in the exact direction I would like to see Priest go, but I just know for a fact that I'm done with Control Priest and just board clears. Priest can now probably get to the point where it can have 30 different AoE cards in Wild and still classify as a Highlander deck. So, like, just when are we going to say that enough is enough and finally give Priest some other way of being able to play the game outside of just being the defensive class? We already know you can heal. We already know that you can clear the board. Anduin, what else can you do? But thank you guys so much for making it to the end of this episode of Hearthstone Discussions. I would like to know you guys' opinion on this because, unfortunately, Priest is just one of those classes that feels like you kind of have to design around people's emotions because the last thing that you want to do is tilt somebody so badly that they're just going to hate the class every single time they go up against it. But sadly, that's just the reality of Priest right now. It just feels so annoying to go up against it, and some players literally just concede as soon as they go against the class. But what do you guys think? What direction would you like to see Priest go in the future? Because I would like to see some kind of mid-range or aggro Priest be at least possible in the future. Maybe not necessarily top tier, but I want to see something. I want to see some love in that direction because unfortunately, Control Priest is just too powerful. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Again, if you guys enjoy this kind of content, feel free to like this video and to subscribe to the YouTube channel for even more uploads we try to do every single day. But yeah, that's going to do it for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed today's episode of Hearthstone Discussions, and we'll see you for the next video.